Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. I'm Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa. And the Stoa is a place where we cohere in dialogue at the knife's edge of this very moment. And today we are with philosopher and author Ole Bjerg. Ole is a associate professor in philosophy and economics at Copenhagen Business School. He's the author of various books, one of them, Making Money, The Philosophy of Crisis Capitalism, and it's the one we're going to talk about today, The Meaning of Being a Man. And I think Ole's a quite important philosopher, and he's talks about like really practical issues, because the last couple of years I've been thinking like, what the heck is money? You know, what is it being a man? And then he's addressing these from a philosophical lens, which I'm quite excited about. And I've been thinking a lot about how to be a man and masculinity. I think I've read every single book, like Harvey Mansfield, Manliness, Warrior, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, The Way of the Superior Man, Jack Donovan's The Way of Men, who's on the Stoa. I haven't read this book yet, so I'm excited to explore it today. So how today's going to work, we're going to have a conversation for the first bit, about 20, 30 minutes, and then start putting your questions in the chat. I'll call on you, unmute yourself. You can ask your question to Ole, and we'll go from there. And if this will be on YouTube, so if you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate that. So that being said, welcome to the Stoa, my friend. You can unmute yourself now, I think. Welcome to the
Thank you. I'm really, I'm humbled by the introduction or whatever it is, but very grateful. And I'm really pleased to be on the Stoa. I didn't know of the Stoa before you wrote me out of nowhere. And then I listened to an interview you had recently with, her name slipped my mind, but she was this Jungian therapist who wrote about motherhood. And then I listened to this conversation and I was just like, wow. It was just so pleasant and so So and now I'm here. So yeah, I'm really happy about that.
Beautiful. Yeah, you were recommended to me by Nina Power, actually, who had a sense maker in residence series at the Stoa. So you got to check them out, and that's when I invited you.
Wow.
So I haven't read your book fully, but I did was looking through it, and in the first part you mentioned Jordan Peterson. And for those in the Stoa know that Jordan Peterson was my therapist for 2 years before he became famous. And we were talking a lot about masculinity and manhood and stuff like that. So it was quite interesting. And that was one of the inspirations for your book, is seeing how kind of his simple, like seemingly simple messages were just like caught on like wildfire in the collective consciousness. So maybe you can touch on that a bit.
Yeah. So now I'm one person from Jordan Peterson. Yeah. I know you and you know Jordan Peterson. I think that's the closest I've been to. I have a friend who interviewed Jordan Peterson's wife recently. So I thought, now I'm two from him. Now I'm one from him. So I'm getting closer. And I will say my initial inspiration from Jordan Peterson was not so much from when I read 12 Rules for Life. I was not so much inspired by the content of the book, but more about the fact that he wrote it and put it out there. And so what that did to me was that I had all these ideas and things I wanted, and I felt that with that book and kind of the impact that it had, I kind of felt that it opened up an intellectual space. I wouldn't call it a safe space, but at least a space where, it was possible to have a conversation about some of these issues. And it's curious because Jordan Peterson, he doesn't talk directly so much about masculinity and men. He does do it, but it's not like his main thing. And yet there's something in it that really appeals to men, obviously. So I will say my initial inspiration was more, I actually had a conversation with Douglas Murray at one point, and he had this metaphor where he said, what he was doing was walking through a minefield, so like sort of carving a path, And then when other people were kind of looking at him and like, oh, he made his way through it, they could kind of follow on that path. I like that metaphor. And for me, I think to some extent, Jordan Peterson, he's kind of clearing a path. He's also walking on some mines, so they explode. So he's kind of taking the first flag there, so for others to continue. And then after I wrote the book, I finished it in the summer, and then it came out here in the fall. I will say that I've had this I've kind of returned to Jordan Peterson in the sense that now I've read his new book. I'm reading into Jung at the moment, and I'm sort of discovering, and I'm listening to his Bible lectures. So I find that I'm discovering like a new layer of Jordan Peterson. And when I say discover, it's been there all along, and there's plenty of people who discovered it before me. So it's not like I'm the first man on Mars or something. That's not, but just for me personally, there's another dimension of Jordan Peterson that is kind of coming to me. So in that sense, the theory of this book is, or the sort of philosophical infrastructure is not so much inspired by Jordan Peterson. It is Heidegger is kind of the main, I wouldn't say protagonist, but he's kind of the main philosopher of the book, closely followed by Hannah Arendt. But those are kind of the two main figures. So
right. And you start off with 3 rules for yourself, which I quite like.
Yeah.
So write only about being a man, write only for men, and write as a man. And I was listening to you on another podcast where you're talking about how a lot of these books contrast being a man to being a woman, or contrast masculinity to femininity, or to feminism. And that was one thing that consistently, I guess, like just disappointed me about reading all these books on masculinity or men, is like David Diaz, The Way of the Superior Man. It's like 90% of it was about how to relate with women. And a lot of these other kind of pickup artist inspired books, similar things. The only book that I came across before yours was Jack Donovan's The Way of Men, which was exclusively about kind of like men for men type thing. And maybe because he's a gay, homosexual male, so maybe that could be influenced that, I don't know. But yeah, so I'm curious if you could talk about those 3 rules and maybe that kind of phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, for me, they were primarily, I'm sure some of you are familiar with these Danish filmmakers. Lars von Trier was one of the most prominent one, and they made these dogma rules for themselves, like they couldn't use artificial music and stuff like that. So for me, these 3 rules were kind of dogma rules, and they were necessary for me in my writing process, because I felt as I started writing the book, I would kind of have this, I would write a sentence, and then there would be this voice in my head going like, and then I would go, and then I would go back and rewrite the sentence and then try again, and then I would get a new flow of thought, and then I would get So I said, I need to do something about this voice. I need to clear a space here for me. And my experience has been that I've done some men's work, like been in men's circles, and my experience is that when I talk just to men, and men that I trust and I know, then it's there's something about the conversation that is much easier. I also experienced it at my work at the university. I've had when I kind of came out as someone who didn't necessarily follow the party line on gender, I would get these visitors to my office, like colleagues, and they would come in through my door, and then they would shut the door behind them. I always have my door open, so they would come in and then shut. And every time I know, okay, now I know what we're going to talk about. Before they had him, and then they would say something about whatever. And it's not like they were talking bad about women or anything like it. It was just like they were frustrated with something, and then they knew they could talk with me in this room. So what I needed to do, I needed to create a similar space in my head where I could kind of just be honest. That's also what this book is for me has been about, is just finding my own voice where I felt I could be honest and just say what kind of was important to me. And for some reason, the inner image that I needed to create was this space of men. And that's, I mean, it's easy to kind of go, oh, he's a sexist, or he doesn't like women or something like that. And there's none of that. And I will say, as soon as I finished the book, the space is opened again. So, I mean, I'm as happy for women to read the book as I am for men, and I'm as happy for women to have an opinion about the book as I have. There's none of that. So for me, it was just like this methodological. I needed to create this space in my head. And so the second one, this is actually the second one, the Write Just for Men, write only about men. This was actually kind of that's also what I use Heidegger for, because a lot of times when we talk about men or women, we use the word gender, and as soon as we start talking about gender, we go into this: what's the difference? What is is there a difference? What are the differences? Difference, and we compare them. And I didn't want to go there. I just wanted to say, now I'm going to just talk about being a man. And then some of the things I say are probably the same for women, and some of it is not. And I have no clue which is which. I just want to go with kind of what I think about, about being a man. And also, that's also kind of I wanted to raise the question of being a man as an ontological question. So it's not about how is men constructed differently from women or all this. It's just like, what's it like being a man? What mode of being? What kind of being is that? And also I kind of wanted to avoid some of the polemics that kind of come up when you start talking about these differences.
Yeah,
and then the final one was, I can't even remember. That was anyway. Maybe we should move on to Write as a Man.
Yeah.
No, I also want to like to address that. This came out of me just feeling that sometimes when I did academic writing, I was losing myself. I was kind of writing myself out of the text, right? And I was also reading texts by others. For instance, by some of my students, I have to say, where I was kind of thinking, I get these papers, they've written it the way I told them to write it. And yet I can't sense them. They're kind of disappearing as writers and as people. So I kind of wanted to find my own voice where I could also give something of myself, like open up, because I think my point here is also this question of what does it mean to be a man? It's a philosophical question, but it's also an existential question for each and every one of us, or at least the ones of us who are men. It's something we need to deal with. So it's also a personal question. And I kind of wanted to bring both things into the book. So there's a bigger part of me in that book than there is in the Money book, for instance, that you were so kind to show.
Yeah, I like that. And before we get to the Heideggerian analysis, I'll share a thought. Then I have a question that'll tag onto it. So I was a trainer at Dale Carnegie Training, how to win friends, influence people. So I pretty much can talk to anyone, right? Like, and I like talking to people with different, like, have epistemic gaps than I do. Mm-hmm. But this is just an observation, but I find I'm like I can speak most freely. And then just the truthfulness just channels through me most easily when I'm with heterosexual men who do not have the sneaky fucker mating strategy. So basically not beta males. I can just talk about anything and just nothing's filtered. And when I talk about other people or kind of like other demographics, I find I have to be more kind of careful at first to kind of get a feel of the dynamics. And so that's what came to mind when you were saying that earlier about colleagues coming to your room, and having a space for that just kind of frees that energy up.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you have any comment about that. The question I'll take in though is backlash, any negative backlash that you receive from this book. And I don't think it's many. And then kind of maybe to contrast Jordan Peterson, who some of the stuff he says is not that controversial, even if you kind of like dig deep into like what he's really saying, but he's coming from like a place, like there's like resentment in his voice. You can kind of like, there's a negative energy coming, which I don't get from you. So I'm just curious about if anything came alive there with what I just said.
So the first one just reminds me of, as I said before, I've done men's work, and one of the keys to men's work is that you work only men. So either it's in a small circle where you're 5, 6, 7 people, men, or I've also been to these larger gatherings where we're like 100 or 140 men, only men. And the fact that it's only men, it makes a huge difference. One of the things that happens when you're only men is that at least if you set the stage right, but you can get to a point where we stop competing because there's no women there, so there's nothing to compete for. So I've kind of seen this, like people will kind of take their egos and just leave it and say, oh, there's no reason to compete here. What else can we do? Let's try helping each other. Yeah, let's try do that. And then we do that. And then as soon as a woman kind of enters the group, or we've even had experiences where there's been like a weekend of just men for 100 men for like Friday to Sunday. And then at some point there's a woman comes to deliver whatever, some food or something else. Just the mere fact that she's there just changes the dynamics. And of course, that's not, this is not something bad about women or anything. I would say quite to the contrary. I mean, it's because they come with a certain energy, which is really good, but it's also, it has an effect, right? So I think, and I will also say that the purpose of men's work is not to just be men. Oh yeah, now we can. No, it's to create a space where we practice talking. So we practice talking honestly about our feelings. And then once we practice in this space of just men, we go out into the world where there's fortunately also women, and then we're better at talking honestly to them as well. But we need to practice here. And I also, I don't know if I mentioned this in the book, I don't remember, but I've thought that one of the things that men, we need to do at the moment, we actually need to learn. There's some things we need to learn from the women. Because the women, they did this in the 70s. They were really good at making their groups with just women, and then they would like practice talking and stuff like that. And then when they did that, they kind of opened up and started doing that out in the world. Super. Yeah, we should do the same. Men should do the same. We haven't developed our own language for talking about what it means to be a man. We need to practice that. And we're on a much lower evolutionary state when it comes to that than women are, because they've done this for 40 years and they're much better at it than we are. And that's only good, but we need to kind of also do that. So,
yeah.
And then you had another question.
There's the resentment thing, which kind of relates to what you just said.
Yeah, that's true.
On the backlash on your book, if you got any like negative backlash from colleagues and stuff.
Did I? There was a little bit of. I've had a little bit, mostly sort of. I don't know if I should go into this. I will say this. I've had a lot less than I expected. I've literally, right when it came out, I had some sleepless nights where I was like, oh no. Yeah, I'm gonna be jumped by a transsexual in my supermarket. I had these fantasies about I'm gonna get fired from all these kind of stuff, and none of that was like. So having said that, it's also not. I mean, I don't know how many people have even read the book, and I think it's. I mean, there's certainly something in here that you can construe as controversial, but I think in order to do that, you kind of need to dig through some obstacles there, especially the beginning it became a little bit more academic or philosophical than I had anticipated. So far I haven't, I will say though that as I was reading the book, but before it was finished, just reading the book kind of did something to me. And it meant that I just writing it, I became better at speaking honestly about these things. And then I was actually invited on a debate in our national television here in Denmark to talk about equality. And then I came in there, and I kind of knew that what I needed to do was to speak from the heart and speak from the stomach. My wife, she told me to wear red socks because red is the color of the root chakra. So I needed to connect to my root chakra and have grounding. So I did that. So I was very grounded when I was in there because I had these red socks on. Of course, they couldn't see it, but I could feel it. So I was very grounded. And then I said what I felt about this. And I said, yeah, I don't know if I should go into this, but I just said something about motherhood. Like there's they were talking about, oh, women are getting discriminated and all that. And then I said, well, I think men, we come into the world with a huge handicap. We can't give birth. That's like a huge handicap. So they have this huge advantage. Like, how great is that? So I kind of was like sort of elevating motherhood. And then I also said that I feel that this, I actually said that I was being a little bit polemical, but I wasn't in favor of, now equality is not the same word in Danish, but the word we use, I was against that. I said, and they were like, whoa. And then I said, because I think this word has been hijacked. So it's being used now for all kinds of ideological purposes that I don't like. But of course, I like the fact that we should have equal value. I think we have that. So anyway, that kind of generated a lot of whir. But fortunately, I'm not on Facebook, and now I'm not on Twitter anymore. So I can,
Yeah, that helps.
yeah. I can just wear red socks and not be on Facebook.
Yeah. And my sense is that, like, just talking to you, it's apparent that you've done the work, like the men's work. You're not just head, your heart, and now the way you speak. And there's not that vibe of like resentment towards women or other people that are not like men. And I think you can like talk about kind of like things that are not on the like the party line, like this disagreeing with the gender philosophy or whatever. If you're coming from that place. Coming from sort of like a loving heart-based place. And I don't think someone like Peterson's coming from that. Maybe we should pivot though to the, before taking people, the Heideggerian analysis of being a man, and you coined a term, being man, as an alternative to the conventional talk about gender and identity.
For me, I was actually trained as a sociologist, but then I sort of gravitated even when I was studying, I gravitated towards philosophy. So I've been thinking a lot about what's the difference between philosophy and other disciplines, and what is it that philosophy does better than other disciplines. And for me, it's asking questions. I think for me, asking the right question, that's 80% of philosophy. So so philosophers are good at asking good questions. And to me, Heidegger, the reason why I think Heidegger for me is like I think for me, he's the greatest philosopher, and other people have other opinions, which I also find, but that he's meant a lot to me. And I think it's because he's so brilliant at asking questions. He just asks the most fundamental questions. Like, and that's kind of what I wanted to do here. So I wanted to pose, I was kind of asking, so what is the question about? What is the men's question? It's certainly not what's the difference between men and women. I can kind of see that going, as soon as people start that question, it kind of goes astray. So I wanted to say, what's the more fundamental question? So I've posed this question of being a man. If it was in German, it would be Mannsein. So Heidegger talks about Dasein, I would be talking about Mannsein. And what I wanted to do was to say, normally there's these two options. You can either go, constructivist, gender is some sort of social construct, or you can go evolutionary biology, like there's males and females, and we used to live out in the jungle, and we used to be monkeys and all that. So, and there's these two options. And for me, neither of the two were kind of satisfactory. So I wanted to find another place, and that for me is ontology. And of course, ontology is also this kind of trick word that philosophers, when we don't know what to say, we can also always throw that word into the conversation. But to me, it doesn't really mean something. Like, to me, it's also the way that this question confronts each and every one of us. How am I confronted with the question of what it means to be a man? Well, when I live my life every single day, when I interact with my sons, when I interact with my wife, whenever I do something, I'm confronted. What does it mean to be a man? How can I kind of become a man? And I think that's not a biological question, nor is it a social question. It's an ontological, existential question. So that's kind of where I wanted to pull the problem into that domain. Then I make a distinction in the book, also following a little from what I just said, where I was kind of trying. That's another thing that philosophy can sometimes do, is to make distinctions, to categorize things and kind of distinguish, map out things. So I said, when we talk about what it means to be a man or these issues, we confuse different. Sometimes we talk about male, female. Sometimes we talk about masculinity, femininity, and sometimes we talk about man, woman, and we treat them as if they're kind of the same, but they're not. So male, female biology, masculine, feminine. In the book, I wouldn't say they're socially constructed, but they're another type of, I put them into kind of the realm of what I call the aesthetic. They're kind of aesthetic questions. They have to do with our desires, how our desires are shaped. And then finally, man, woman are this is the realm of ontology. It's also the realm of ethics, in the sense that the question of, or the fact that I'm a man is both, it's both a predicament. It's something I'm thrown into the world as a man, or at least as someone who kind of is on the path to growing up as a man. But it's also something that I have to work very hard to become. It's like being a man is a full-time job. I mean, you just work on it all the time and you never finish. It's not like, oh, now I'm 80. Now I don't care about it. I haven't met an 80-year-old man who didn't care just as much about what it means to be a man as someone who is 15. I mean, it's just, and it's because it's something we feel that we know that it's something we need to live up to. It's like, it's something we've been given. It's like a gift we've been given. And then we're like, oh, wow, I was given this gift. I wonder what I can do with that, or I wonder what I'm supposed to do with that. And just to clear the field here, but of course, I talk all about being a man. I think this is the same. I mean, of course, for women, there's some of this is the same. So it's not to say that, oh, women can just sit back. Oh, I'm a woman. I don't have to. Of course, it's not like that. It's also a full-time work to be a woman. I haven't tried it, but I've looked at some of them, and it seems that they're working at least just as hard as I am. So it's not, and again, it's not a competition here. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I haven't heard this very novel kind of like unpacking that you did with that tripartite. So I thought that was very cool. So let's pivot to the questions. I'll take on Ryan first. If you can unmute yourself, Ryan.
Yeah, I really liked that last part too, that continual unfolding of manhood and continual stepping into it. It reminds me like about like how Kierkegaard talks about faith. I'm actually reading Merton right now, and he's describing grace and the contemplative life of prayer in that same way, that it's a constant unfolding. Yeah, and so in that same sense, how has your experience of writing this book changed the way that you show up as a man day to day? Your experience of manhood, how has that unfolding taken shape in your actual life? How are you writing yourself as a man into your life?
Wow. That's a biggie, Ryan. That's a biggie. So I think I want to share. I don't know if this answers your question, but I feel like I want to share this. So about 3 years ago, I was at my first men's gathering in Sweden. It's called the European Men's Gathering. It was out in the forest in Sweden. And I didn't know much about it, what it was going to be. So I just showed up. I thought we were going to be 20 people. And then it was just like 140 men. And we were there for the whole weekend. And then in that weekend, there was this rite of passage event where we were led into the woods and something happened. And then as part of this, we were kind of walking there. It was dark and it was confusing. And all of a sudden we were kind of walking in a line. And then at some point we were separated. So I was kind of walking alone there. And then all of a sudden there was this guy with a spear. So he put the spear into my face and he said, and then he challenged me and said, something along the lines of, what is it that you have to give to the world? Something along those lines, something. And I was like, what? And then it just flew out of my mouth. I said, I want to tell stories that are true and that give people hope. And that was the moment where I decided to write this book. So I think one of the things that this has done to, and in the process of writing the book, I've also developed, but I think one of the things I've done is that I minimize. So for me, being a man is not just something I practice in the private sphere. It's also something I practice as an intellectual. So I've become more free in a sense, just like an event like this. I'm just like, I'm saying what I want to say here. I'm not putting any limitations on myself or something. So something about this speaking out in public. So Jordan Peterson, he has this, I think that's my favorite rule from the first book, is this, tell the truth or at least don't lie. And again, women should tell the truth as well. But for me, it's part of what it means to be, for me to be a man, is having the courage to tell the truth also in public. So that at least that's one of the things. So for me, the book is also in a way, it's my coming out as a man in a kind of, if you know what I mean. So and then as Peter also touched upon, I think I can do that without, I think a couple of years ago, I would, or maybe more, I'd easily be sort of very agitated, like very, and whereas now I can hopefully be a little bit more relaxed. And if other people go, I can kind of just sink into my red socks and be like, okay, fine, yeah, I get it. This is what I stand for, blah, blah, blah. Here's my root chakra, blah, blah. Yeah. So did that answer your question, Ryan, or do you want to?
Any follow-up, Brian?
No, I think I'm just taking away courage, truth, maybe some grace in there, and Red Sox. I'll get myself a pair. Thanks.
Yeah, we got to step our red sock game here at the Stoa. Nathan, you're up next.
Yeah, thanks. I guess my question comes from like a perspective of fatherhood, possibly. And so do you have any senses of like the men in the past versus men now in the way we're raised? And how does that affect fatherhood in your opinion?
Yeah. Again, I'll say something else, and let's see if it works as an answer. Something that I've also spent a lot of energy and time on, or spent my time on the last 2 to 3 years, is family constellations work. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Some of you probably are. So I'm training to become a family constellation, and I'm doing that work right now. Not right now, but yeah. And what you see in this work is that you see these multiple generations of mothers or fathers. And what I've learned through that is that we should be very, very, very careful about judging our fathers or grandfathers, because what I see is that everyone in such a line has worked or is working as hard as they can with whatever they have what they've received, right? So you rarely, or if you ever come out of a family constellation and think, oh yeah, the grandfather, he was an asshole. Because you see him, oh, this is what he had to work with. Wow. Then he did that. And of course, so I do think that I think that some of the circumstances are, of course, different. I think our generation of fathers, I don't know, are you a father, Nathan? Yeah. So I think to some extent, we need to work a little bit harder in terms of establishing authority in relation to our children, and also in relation to other institutions. Right now, for instance, I have the feeling with this corona thing, where the government wants to give me all kinds of orders of what's going to happen with my kids and what they should do. I'm kind of thinking, who actually owns whose children are they? So this is, it's almost like, yeah, it's the government children. Now you get to borrow them for a little while if you behave, but we will ultimately decide. And I'm just like, no. So there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of hard work in that. And also something I've also been through a divorce with my first son. And also there was like, I really had to work hard to just earn or get the authority that I kind of felt was kind of natural. So there's some work we need to do there. I'm sure my father, he had other kinds of work that he needed to do. I know, but I think some of the authority was kind of a little bit more, I wouldn't say for free, but it's more sort of taken for granted, for better and for worse. So I think that's one thing. I think I want to say something else also, because sometimes we hear this, there's this boys crisis, and men are in a crisis, and women are just doing fine, and they are getting promoted, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. I don't buy into that. The idea that you can have a society where the men are unhappy and the women are happy it's just, that doesn't work like that. Either both are happy or both are unhappy. You can't have, So I think, so if anyone is in a crisis, I think we're both in a crisis. They may look a little bit different, but we're both in a crisis. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Nathan.
Do you have any follow-up, Nathan?
No, I don't think so. I appreciate your answer. I had a few thoughts when you were speaking earlier, but it kind of escaped. So thanks for that answer.
Can I tell a little bit? I want to tell another story. This is for another one from the men's gathering. So last year, I was also at the men's gathering, and then they had invited like some people to speak, and there was one guy there who was I think it was the European champion of Thai boxing, and he was on to go to Japan to fight for the world championship. So he was like, and he was a good-looking guy, muscles, like, and a friendly, And then he was introduced, and they kind of said, "Oh yeah, here's this guy, European champion, blah blah blah," and all the men in the room were like, yeah. And then afterwards, they kind of asked him, "So what about family? What?" And he was 30 years old, and he said, "When I was 15, I met a woman. Now we're married, and I have 3 kids." And then the crowd, and this was like men in all ages, but a lot of them in their 20s, they went mad. So they've been, European champion of Taiwan, great, 3 kids and married with the same. They were like, yeah. And I was just like, yes, I love that. And I think that's one of the things we've got going for us right now, is that we have young men, for whom one of their primary aspirations in life is to become a good father. I think that's, I can move just by thinking about it. I think, yes, there we go. And this is something I certainly didn't experience when I was that age. So that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, that's awesome. Joe, you had a question.
Yeah, I always get curious about what happens at men's circles. And I know for myself, when I'm in circles with women and genderqueer people, or just genderqueer people, that there's like this relaxing that happens, and this ability to feel more free to speak. And also there's this sort of like freak flag that gets to fly. And so I'm curious what that freak flag is like at the men's gathering, and especially how it relates to like eros and tenderness and intimacy.
I'm not sure. So did you say freak flag? I'm not sure what that means. Can you?
Well, I mean, that's something. Oh, the dog is here with me now. That's something that comes from queer culture. It's like, let your freak flag fly, like be all the things that you are. And I mean, I think like a kind of like pop culture version of that is like glitter and wearing clothes from whatever gender norm you want, and being intimate with whoever you would like, and like dancing and enjoying and being wild. And also, I think it can be like sharing different kinds of intimacy than are even known about in popular culture.
Okay, so I think I have there's two sides to my answer. I think the one thing that I experience is when men are together with men, what happens is that their feminine side comes much more to the fore, because there's no one else. Like if there's a woman in the room, she will kind of naturally occupy like the feminine space, and we will be more sort of, yeah. So but when there's no woman there, it's like then the space is more open, and then I experience that it's a lot easier for men, myself included, to kind of open up for my vulnerabilities and caring and all that kind of stuff that we associate with the feminine. So that's the one thing. The other thing you said about the freak flag, I think you called it, I think what happens in men's circles is the opposite. So it's not like we have this, I think it's actually because I think men, a lot of the time, like out in our normal life, we actually compete to be special and to be unique and to be like, oh, I'm the one that's more like, so we compete to differentiate. But when we come together, it's like the movement is the other way. It's like, it would be like, so I have a father. Oh, I also have a father. I also have a father. Wow. What a coincidence. We all have a father. Wow. Let's talk about that we have a father. Or like I have a son. Okay. I mean, that's not quite the same, but anyway, so we kind of move to those more, not like my feeling is that these, what you call like the freak flag thing, they become less important. It doesn't matter. And what I also experience is that at these men, I don't know what job these men have. I have no clue. I know very little about their kind of that type of. I know very little about the areas of their life where they are kind of unique and different. But I know more. What I do get to know about is kind of details or things about the things where we have in common. Like, for instance, like this is a big theme in men, like a father. What's your relationship to your father? That's kind of the things that I think comes to the fore in these men's circle. Yeah.
Any follow-up, Joe?
Yeah, and that was kind of what I was wondering, because it seems like there's this like, for men, maybe the freakiness, which doesn't always have to be like big and explosive, but when I think about it, I think about like war and like aggression and like super sexualization and like all these things that are put out into the public space right now, for men to inhabit or become or whatever. And yeah, so I was just curious about that, because it seems like there's a lot of repressed things for queer folks and for women that in the spaces that we inhabit together, that are separate from men. Sometimes that freak flag looks like for like women, often, you know, they show a lot of affection to each other in public, and then in private spaces that gets amped up even more. And so I would say that is something that it's a relaxation, but it's also like something that's very interesting and evocative. And so I wonder about like also like the tenderness aspect. Like, do men get to experience more tenderness, like physical touch, like yeah, things like that too?
Yeah. Again, two things. The one thing about, so another thing that we can do when we're only men is that we can create desexualized spaces. So you can have very intimate And we do like we will have wrestling, we will have more sort of tender exercise, bodily, whatever. But it's in a desexualized, there's no sex involved. So whereas if there's a woman there, you can sometimes have this, oh yeah, oh, I'm gonna carry her, am I gonna touch her breast, blah blah blah, and then you get into your head and you get out of the exercise and you're kind of in a different space. So that's also one of the things you can do with this. And then I could post this this is just like a hypothesis, but is it possible that for women, the things that they have in common is something that they it sort of gives itself to them in a more immediate sense. We can take like what do you call, like you get your period, right? That, I mean, all women get that, or yeah. So so that kind of marks, it's something that all women have in common, and it's not something they have to do something, they just get it. So that's something that kind of immediately reminds them, oh yeah, I'm a woman, and I'm reminded about that once a month. And then maybe if you have a child, that's also very sort of things that, yeah, of course you have to do something to get them, I know that, but at the same time, whereas for men, it's a little less, we need to do more work to get to that space, to kind of discover the things we have in common. So in that sense, some of the things that I think we're trying to create in these men's circles, to some extent, maybe some of these things women get, I was going to say for free, and I know, I mean, don't get me wrong, but it kind of comes naturally in a sense. I've also thought about many of these men's events, or an element in some of them is this idea of a rite of passage. It's also something I've done with my sons, which is kind of marks this transition from being a boy to becoming a man. And it's something, so you do these rituals around it. And of course you can do that with women as well. But I think that for women, there are these rites of passages are sort of more like getting your period is a rite of passage. Getting your first child is a rite of passage. Not being able to get children anymore is also a rite of passage. So they're kind of instituted by nature. Whereas for men, we kind of need to create them in order to remind ourselves that, oh, now I'm in another life stage. Now I'm in another life stage. Now I'm in another life stage. So yeah, so I think that could be a possibility of some of the differences between these two kinds of spaces. And having said that, I think there's some of it which is also the same, or yeah.
One thing I'll add, my experience doing these men's group things, the last one was in London, England, at Rebel Wisdom. They had a men's retreat, and there was like a really cool exercise they did where we just felt into our frustration, our anger, and then we just walked around the room like really fucking pissed off. And then we had to grab a random man, hold his shoulders, and then just push as hard as we can, and just yell at him, just tell him how we want to kill him, and just like, you know, all our aggression. And then there's this underlying kind of feeling that I have, like when I get pissed off, especially at another man, I just want to like just rip his throat out with my teeth sometimes. There's like a primal violence. And in that space, when we all know that we can kill each other and want to kill each other, there's a part of us, and that's just, it's not sublimated through sports or video games. It's just out in the open, it's present. That's sort of freaky, you know, to use Jote's language. And it kind of has a transmutes the energy into a more kind of loving, or has the capacity to hold space for each other. So that's what came to mind when Joe's question came up.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
I also have, can I follow up one more time? Okay. I heard you say that it's a non-sexualized space, and I'm curious what that means.
Desexualized space, but desexualized. Yeah.
And I'm curious what that means to you, and also I'm curious where, if there's a place for Eros in that space, or how it expresses. I know in the spaces where men are not present, that I've participated in, they're definitely not desexualized. There's definitely a very clear, more and less clear, but I've been in a lot of spaces that really embrace the erotic energy, not by having penetrative sex or doing like sexual acts, but the energy is there and the appreciation is there. So I'm curious how that comes through. And also, yeah, I'll just leave it there.
You know what? Now that you asked the question, I actually wonder. I think it's the first time that I use the word desexualized space myself. I've heard another guy or some other guys talk about it, and it made sense. But it's the first time. So I was kind of thinking. Now I tested whether I can. And now you're asking me into it. So let's see if I know what it means. I think. I mean, just because it's just men, it doesn't mean that there's a guarantee that there would be no. It would be desexualized, and I know when you organize these kind of events, you want to find the balance between. You want it to be you want some sort of intimate, whether it's wrestling or caress, whatever it is. Like you kind of also want that dimension of being together, but you don't want it to become sexual. Because then you just get, tricked. All these other kinds of stuff triggered that space is not designed for that. So it's a delicate balance, and I know that there has been events where that line has been crossed in a way, and so which may not lead to kind of the kind of result you want to get. Because the trick here is create a space which is so safe that people are willing to kind of go a little bit further than they would ordinarily do, but you don't want to push them. You don't want to, you also want, yeah. So I think when you open this sexual energy, and there's events for that. I mean, there can be tantra events and all kinds of stuff. It's a different kind of energy you open. And they can be good for other things, but that's not what you want in a men's event. Again, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's kind of what came to mind when you said it.
I guess I'm wondering about. It seems like, let's see, I have an understanding of eros that doesn't necessarily relate to penetrative sex or sex.
Are you saying arrows?
Eros. Like
arrows, like a bow and an arrow.
Like the god Eros.
Eros.
E-O-R, yeah.
E-R-O-S.
Eros. Yeah. So like in erotic. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Okay, but now, so what you have... Please continue. I just wanted to, because I was a little confused with that word. Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. Like the container that you're holding isn't built to hold all the complexities of sexuality.
Yeah.
And so I guess I know I've heard that in some men's groups there's a lot of homophobia, like a fear that comes up. And then also there's naturally like an attraction that also comes up between people, especially when exploring intimacy and just like appreciating each other's bodies, not necessarily with the intention of becoming sexual. And so I guess I'm just curious about how that expresses.
Yeah.
Because it's like when we go to the point of saying desexualized, sometimes that it blocks many kinds of appreciation.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna
like turn on aliveness, whatever.
Jump in here just to pause that for a moment. We're at the top of the hour. Are you okay do you have a hard stop? Or are you okay to stay a little bit after?
Me? I can stay. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'll let you respond to Joe's question, and we'll take in one more question.
Yeah, there was, I mean, I can't help. So I told you I was originally trained as a sociologist. So, and sociology to some extent, it's an empirical science. So there was something you kind of snug it, but there was this premise that, in these men's circles, there's a lot of homophobia. I haven't seen any. So I'd be curious, or I don't know. And that's not, I mean, I haven't been in all the men's circles in the world, of course. So I'm sure that there are homophobic men's circles, but I haven't experienced it. I haven't seen, and I will tell you this. I know, so we are 100 men each year, 140. And I know that there are gay people there, I have no clue who they are, because it doesn't matter. They're not there as gay, they are there as men. And I think if there is a or if there is, it also kind of speaks a little bit to what Peter was saying about what kind of a space it is. So you want, everyone is welcome, or all men are welcome, but you want them to be there as men. You don't want them to be there as gay or consultant or whatever other identity they may have. You kind of want to get to that. So I would say it doesn't. My experience, it doesn't matter, or it's not an issue. However, if someone were to bring it up as an issue, you can do that in many ways. It could be totally fine, but it could also be, as soon as you get into this, is what you're saying now homophobic, then what happens in many men is that it triggers this impulse that now we need to care. Now I need to take responsibility for the other, and I need to take responsibility for the other person's feelings. Men are very good at that. That's kind of our natural disposition. The problem is sometimes when we do that, we forget our own feelings. So we're kind of over here, taking care of the woman, or taking care of someone who in the group who may be vulnerable or something like that, and then we kind of forget our own feelings. So the kind of what you want to train in this is that you stay here, you stay with yourself in a way. That's not to say that you should bully the other, of course you shouldn't, but it's important to generate that sense of everyone is kind of staying with their own feelings.
Yeah, and just to reflect on my experience, when Joe was talking, like I experienced zero homophobia as well in those circles. It's like it just didn't come up, and there wasn't that like sexual like byproduct energy too coming online too, even though there was like homosexual men in the space. So it's maybe something to unpack at a later session, but it's a curious thing. Maybe there's like a myth of homophobia that people have on these projecting these spaces. So we'll take in Kevin as the last question.
Hey, thanks. I'll just add on that maybe there's some homophobia when you're a teenager, but I feel like that's sort of something that most people grow out of maybe. Anyways, so Ole, in your experience of like writing this book and investigating the ontological meaning of like what it means to be a man, are there any big like ontological contradictions that you've sort of faced in like what it means to be a man, and how have you resolved or overcome or dealt with these contradictions?
Yeah, I haven't. I don't know if I would call them contradictions. After I finished the book, I've kind of become very aware of its limitations. So it kind of, it's a little bit like, and Heidegger's at a completely different league, so I'm not comparing us sort of but when you read Sein und Zeit, which is about being, Heidegger doesn't give you very many advice on how to live your life. He kind of talks, be eigentlich, be authentic. That's kind of it, right? So it's not like a manual for, okay, this is what I need to do in my life. There's very little of that. And maybe in my book, there's a little bit more of it, but not a lot, really. And as I was writing the book, I was very careful of sort of, I don't want to go into this mode of, here's Ole, he's a man. He knows how, yes, you should do exercise, and you should have 5 children. And I didn't want to go into that. So I'm very modest in terms of giving life advice in the book. I didn't want to go there. So there's very little of that. But afterwards, I kind of, this question of, okay, how can we then work with this? How can we become, what are the resources that we can tap into in order to become better men? And this, I think this is something I want to continue working on. And I think I talk a little bit about masculinity and femininity, a little bit, but that I think there's more there. And I think there's also, and this is something we can tap into using Jung or family constellations work, or I think there's certainly something about how is it that we can, this is also a question that this is something that Jordan Peterson addresses very directly is how can you become a better man or woman? But I find that where Jordan Peterson kind of, I don't know, falls short or whatever, it's very, how can I put this? I think there's some resources in the collective unconscious that Jordan Peterson is not entirely unlocking. There's something about that. Now I've experimented with, we actually did that. We've been doing that online. It's been very exciting. We've been doing these workshops with my friend Viljami Lehtonen from Finland, where we have used family constellations to explore the Robert Moore's 4 masculine archetype and also their female equivalents. So the warrior, the hero, the king, warrior, magician, lover, right? So we work with those in a constellation setting. And what you do there is you kind of open up this space of these unconscious resources. And when you work with those, you can kind of tap into them and use them to kind of boost your masculinity in a good way, or you're becoming a man. So that's kind of my, I think there's something there that I really want to work more on. There's a big resource in that. So, and it's not a contradiction, so to speak, but it's more of more research is needed. If it's research, I'm not even sure it's research, but it's, that's kind of where I want to work on more. And I said before this thing, I think being a man is a huge gift. And I don't think we as individuals or as societies, maybe we've forgotten, maybe there's a little bit of an answer to Nathan's question. I think we're forgetting a little bit how big of a gift that actually is, how big of a resource that is, how big of a resource masculinity and femininity for that matter, how big of a resource that is. We're not tapping into it. And to further go a little bit more, another thing I in the book, I distinguish between being a man and being a human being. And what I say, I use Heidegger's, he has these terms of Zuhandenheit and Vorhandenheit. So present at hand and ready at hand. Ready at hand is when we use things like when I write with my, present at hand is when I measure it and kind of hold it out here, and you know that distinction. And for me, it's a little bit the same with being a man and being a human being. When I say that I'm a human being, it's present at hand. It's very distant. It's a very vague, or it's a more like an objective thing. It has less meaning. Whereas if you say I'm a man, it has more. That's what I do when I'm in the process of using myself. I mentioned this example in the book. Imagine you could kind of see your own funeral, Kevin, and then someone stands up, maybe your wife, maybe your best friend, maybe your son, stands up and say, yeah, Kevin, he was a really good human being. Option number 1. Option number 2, Kevin, he was a really good man. Mm-hmm. To me, the first one speaks to my mind. The second one speaks to my gut. And if you want to test this further, you can try and flip it around and say, hey, Kevin, he's a bad human being. Kevin, he's a bad man. He's not a good man. It really hits you. There's much more at stake in being a man. Being a human is, you don't have to do anything to be a human. Everyone is a human. It's just, you get it for free. But being a man, full-time work until you die. So there's more at stake there, but there's also a larger resource there. Mm-hmm. I think there's a huge potential in our culture to unlock that.
That was a great response. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you went into the sort of archetypal thinking, like the king magician. That's sort of what I was getting at with like the contradictions of like these different sort of narrative parts of yourself. And I guess one question maybe to end on is like, maybe those four that Moore invented are just part of it, right? So like, and if you come from sort of an existentialist training mindset, maybe you've said that it's a gift, and like there's this act of almost creation and becoming a man. So I wonder what you think about sort of, what am I trying to ask? Yeah, like, I guess, yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't know what kind of question to make, but yeah, what the act of, yeah, I don't really have a question.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. So we'll close out here. That was a fun conversation. Ole, any closing thoughts or anything that came alive for you?
There's two things I want to say. I have two offers. One thing I want to let you in on not a secret, but the book, it's physical, but it's also digital. Both of them are published under Creative Commons license, which means you can copy it for free. I mean, if you don't want to do that with the physical book, it's just hardware, but the electronic version is free for everyone. So if you can just find it, or if you can also just send me an email, or you can post it on the webpage, Peter, or I'm happy for anyone to access this book for free if they want to. So that's the first one. I don't know, maybe Peter, if you want to, I can send you a version, and then maybe you can put it somewhere on the webpage, something like that. So
sure, yeah.
That's the one thing. The other one is, if you're interested, Peter, I don't know if it works in your format, but I'd be happy to do one of these archetype sessions here on the Stoa. It's something I've been thinking about, what happens if you do constellations work, and then you broadcast it at the same time. So you have some people in the room like we're here, but then maybe you can have other people watching, whatever, if they want to. That's an offer for you, Peter. If you want that, I'm happy to do it, and we could do it with William. We've done it several times on Zoom, and I know it works. And it's for me, it's really like, this is philosophy in practice. And we've done it. We do it with men and women. So there's also four female archetypes, which are kind of just mirror images of the others. So yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to do that, we can talk about that later. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite. We have a wisdom gym here where we do kind of cool stuff like that. So perhaps it could be like a one-off or maybe a short series. Yeah. And I love your vibe, by the way. You're like at the intersection of like philosophy, men's work, family constellation work. So yeah, I really dig what you're doing. I'd love to have you back. And you might come back for like a for conversation with Nina Power.
I'll do. I love this format. I love this, and so whatever, I'm up for it. Yeah, I love this kind of conversations. I really appreciate all the questions and your reactions. I really appreciate that. So I'm very happy.
Beautiful. So I'll make some closing announcement, but Ole, thank you for coming to the Stoa, my friend. That was a lot of fun. The next session is today at 5 p.m. Eastern time, and you might like this session, Ole. That's Michael Mead is coming in, talk about myth, ritual, and rites of passage. As part of the same shadow series that you watched, that you mentioned earlier. So you can RSVP at thestoa.ca. And then, we have a bunch of cool events coming up. You can check on the website. So that being said, everyone, thank you for coming to the Stoa today.